Alright, the last thing that we did was to add the gobo with a swirly pattern on it. Now it's time to see how this works. Let's do a test render. Nice. See those darker areas in the fog? That shows how we can have this kind of effect without adding much geometry. In fact, just one polygon, the gobo. So you don't need to go overboard to create cool effects. And if you think about it, this is actually a replica of what works in real life. And that's what makes working with reality in Lux so interesting. Alright, as nice as this is, we need a couple of additional elements. The lamp above the door needs to be turned on. To do this, we select the material, which is called wall_light_bulb. Right-click on it and select Convert to Light. This converts all the polygons that have that material into little mesh lights. The texture is not used, but you can change the color of that light to your liking. We can find the newly defined light in the Lights tab, of course. I'm going to assign a custom group to this particular light so that I can adjust it independently from the other lights. I call this group Bulb. I know that the light bulb is going to be a faint light. That's usually how they are. So I set the gain for it at 0.0045 and with a color temperature of 3200 Kelvin because that warm tone is typical of light bulbs. I want to see it, but I don't want to flood the scene with light. That would be a distraction and it would interfere with the fog. We just need to register its presence, so a very low gain will do. I also want to check the glass of the lamp to be real glass, Lux style. The material has been converted from the original matte to be glass. That's thanks to the modified materials that have been applied by Axel. We need to simply check that the texture from the alpha channel is not there. It's superfluous with real glass and it would actually interfere. Let me show you what I mean by switching to the Surface tab of Studio and selecting the same material there. Now here we can see the transparency map that has been used for simulating the glass in Studio. This is because Studio doesn't have a glass material. Lux does. Lux has a material that is inherently transparent, or better, semi-transparent, like glass is. So in Lux and reality, a transparency map is not necessary. And actually, it will create problems because if you apply a transparency map to a material that is already semi-transparent, you will make that material disappear. Now, we don't want the glass to disappear. We want to see through the glass. We want to see the glass present, but we don't need this transparency map for creating the effect. Now, if you're asking yourself why reality is not smart enough to figure this out, that's because a transparency map could be used for creating irregularly shaped objects. For example, you could be creating a broken glass pane or a glass pane that has a bullet hole. In that case, a transparency map would be the perfect tool for the job. I set the reflection color to a light gray and the transmission to a nice orange. I think that that kind of light would have an orange glass, but feel free to change it to green or any other color that you like. Traditionally, I saw lamps like those with either clear or orange glass, but that could be an Italian tradition. What's missing? If we think about it, the moonlight is generally what we want to see in a scene like this. I want to see the light, but I don't have a need for the image of the moon. There is no room for it in the frame. So I just add the mesh light and position it at the top right of the frame. The parameters that I used in my scene are x at 620.9, y at 1005.3, z at 606.37, x rotation is minus 153.65, y rotation is 53.20, and z rotation is minus 1.37. In reality, I assign this to a group called Moon and set the color temperature to 9500, which will give us a nice cool blue that is very moon-like. I also set the gain to 0.5 since the moonlight is supposed to be faint. The idea here is to gain some definition for the building so that we can see the walls and the steps. At the same time, we don't want to compete with the protagonist of our scene, the ghostly light coming from the portal. Again, we need to think about balance in the scene and bring the eyes of the viewer to the focal point of the picture. Speaking of the portal light, I want that to be quite bluish too. So I'll set the color temperature for it at 9500 Kelvin. Lastly, I think I just want to change the camera points of view just a little bit. So let me do that before we do our next render. Now we are ready for the render. And here we can see that the image is actually working the way we expected. Now there is a little problem there with that mesh light being visible. That is a projection of the mesh light that is up there, the right side, interacting with the fog. Sometimes these things happen. It's not a problem. We can fix it. We will fix it in studio. Before we do that, though, I like to change the exposure of this image a little bit. I want to make it a little darker. There is too much light here, too much going on. So let's lower the shutter speed and the f-stop. That's way too much. So let's compensate a little bit with the ISO. We need to go back to the shutter speed of 1 second. Okay, that looks good. Let's bring these parameters inside reality. So we click on the camera tab and just repeat the same parameters in the exposure control. So ISO speed 125, f-stop 4, and now these parameters are saved with our scene. So they will be always used automatically. So now let's see how we can fix that light. We basically need to change the position. These things need to really be done with a trial and error kind of approach. And fortunately, Lux allows us to go very fast in this. We can just lower that light a little bit. That's right. And I'll just tilt the angle a few degrees. All right, so that looks good. Let's see how it works. Okay, we can see that the projection has moved, and now it is faded a little bit. At this point, I don't want to spend too much time adjusting the light. The important thing here is to be aware of the issue and how to fix it. Let's make a new adjustment and see how it goes. Okay, we can still see it, but let's not spend too much time there. What I want to do now is to use the spotlight inside the room to add a bit more light to the floor. I can see those beams, but I want to have more light there because I know that it will play very well with the bump map on the floor. So what we need to do here is to basically tilt the light down a little bit. So I'll switch to the perspective view and I'll switch to my wireframe mode so that I can see inside the room. And then we click on the spotlight and I'll frame it with that and just move away. This is a useful technique to get to the right point of framing an object. And now we can see that the gobo being parented to the light will help us because as we tilt the light, the gobo will follow. Now, the X rotate parameter that you see there is where we need to operate, but if we do it through the universal tool, many times we can increment our rotation less than 5 degrees. So what I need to do is to take note of that name, of that parameter, and then go to the Parameters tab and operate on the slider. In that way, I can use a smaller increment and so do a very fine adjustment of that light. I don't want to change this scene too much. I just want to tilt that light just a tiny bit, so a couple of degrees. I will try this first, see how that works, because everything else works pretty well. So we just want a little accent of light on the floor. Let's do a quick test render. So it's maybe a little more, but not enough. Never mind, we can just increment the rotation just a tiny bit more. There you go. Here we see it. Now that is exactly what I wanted. The accent of light on the floor. It's just very, very subtle, but it's there. And this is really illustrating the concept that we introduced a few lessons before of painting with light. We knew we wanted that kind of accent, so what do? We tilt the light a little bit to create that effect. We don't work in post-processing, we don't create special effects, we just act on the light. So I'll fast forward to the final result so we can conclude this lesson. And now we can see that the result is in fact working. I might need to change some lights a little bit. Maybe give the door lamp some more strength. But the last change that we need to introduce is the selection of the film response preset. And I'll use again the Agfa Color Optima 2 200 CD. Selecting that film response made the image go a little too dark. So let's adjust the exposure a bit. by increasing the film speed. I'll use a custom value of 140. Yes, we are actually going to take advantage that, after all, we are not using a camera but a piece of software. You can break the rules after you've learned them. And here we are going to dial a completely arbitrary film speed. It works. The fog in Reality version 1.25 is a very useful effect. If you're careful, you can use it with sunlight, with other light sources, and obtain a beautifully realistic atmosphere that can add that extra touch to your scene to make it look less perfect, less sterile, and more like a real photo. Just as an exercise, let's turn off the spot inside and raise the moonlight gain up to 10. Now let's click on the black body temperature checkbox and lower the color temperature to something around 5000, which will counter the effect of the settings that we used in Reality. Voila! You have now a daylight scene soaked in fog. Maybe this is a corner of all London? This concludes our tour of the fog prop. I hope you found it interesting. Have fun.